faces, and I'm happy to meet some new faces. So thank you all for coming. So this presentation is called Transcending Traditional Photography and a few things that I've learned along the way. As Paulo Ventura, one of my favorite artists, has said, I use photography not to describe reality, but to tell a reconstructed story, an imaginary world. And I use more than a camera. I've discovered that technology has the potential to enhance my creativity and expand my artistic horizons. But is it still photography? We're all asking that. But first, a quick and very shameless promotion. My book, The Rest Between Two Notes, it's still available. The easiest place to get it is on Amazon. Just a few spreads. And my first book, which came out in 2013, is called Escape Artist, The Art of Fran Forman. Now, I've dispensed with that, so I want to mention that when I first began showing my work about close to 20 years ago, the gallerist said to me, but this is not a photograph. So I wondered, is it a digital collage that I'm doing? A digital montage? Is it photomontage? Or am I making photographic composites? Is it photo painting? If it starts as a photograph or fragments of photographs, or if you use image synthesis software and you transform it by adding all these possible features, is it your photograph or is it a photograph at all? Is it even photography? Is it art? And does the label matter anyway? What I do is I collaborate with my photographs and with other machines to create a kind of hybrid monster of photomontage. What I make are images. Can an artist express her feelings and emotion by using software to create her images, to use fragments that others might have created? In fact, this has been going on for a long time, just as digital composers sample fragments of other people's music, like Moby, and artists have been copying other people's work since forever. For example, Herbert Bayer from the Weimar Republic in the 1930s created this photomontage. And then Jerry Ullsman, probably 50 years later, pretty much did the same thing. So my journey began probably in the late 50s when I first saw The Family of Man. And I would peruse Life magazines and Look magazines that my parents had. And I love looking at the images. And in fact, all I did was copy the drawings from the magazines. This is me at age 9. There's a pencil in my hand. I'm sitting on the grass and I'm drawing, which was what I loved to do more than anything. In the early 1970s, I discovered photography. Someone gave me a huge pile of camera magazines and I fell in love. I particularly love the work of Dwayne Michaels, still do. I love the work of Ralph Eugene Meatyard, still do. Park Harrison. And I started my foray into photography in the early 1970s. So this was from 1974, when I'm starting to play with the human form with masks, light, and shadows. And even at this early stage, I'm fascinated by geometry, diagonals, and windows. I was also discouraged by what felt like an arbitrary frame around the photograph. So the images that I took, mostly self-portraits, presented a narrative, had me moving out of the frame. I was interested in movement and storytelling. This was a very early attempt to make a sequence, breaking through the limitation of the single frame. And I must have felt restricted by the rectangle because I kept trying to break out of it. And here I am again, the mid-70s, moving, trying to break out of the frame. But in 1989, I discovered it was possible to draw on the computer using what was then called pixel paint. So I started using a mouse instead of a pencil. A few years later, I learned Photoshop and other software, and I entered the world of software manipulation. Now I could manipulate photographs. I have never felt comfortable calling myself a photographer. I feel like I'm more of a painter that uses the camera to place various colors onto my palette. And I only embrace software to manipulate and enhance those colors. And as Jerry Ullsman has said, why should the primary moment of truth have to occur when you click the shutter? In my earliest professional work in photomontage, I took this to heart. One of my first job opportunities was to work for Penguin Books, and I designed a CD-ROM, if you remember what they are, which was a complete gallery and books and hyperlinks about Jack Kerouac. It was done in conjunction with the Kerouac estate. And like the work of Kerouac, photomanipulation can blur the line between truth and illusion, which was fine with me. One of the features of the CD-ROM was his entire book, The Dharma Bums, which was illustrated with 34 different illustrations, and there were little Easter eggs in all of those that were hyperlinked, and the words were hyperlinked too. So remember, this was 1994, 20 years ago. I went crazy with images. The next big job I had was for a museum in New Hampshire, in which I created an installation about immigration to New England, particularly this one family that arrived in New Hampshire in the early 20s. I was able to scan archival images, textures, and even an occasional photograph. So this was completed in 1996. And every image here that you see links to somewhere else. In the early 90s, I started making my own personal composites using the new digital tools and my own old family photographs. But again, is this photography? This was done in 1993. And I was just beginning to experiment with my own work. These were women in my family over several generations. What I have learned along the way is there's a whole manipulative tradition since day one. In fact, photomontage first emerged in the mid-1850s as experimental photographers aspired to create images that could rank alongside fine art. Purists in the photographic community did not warm to the blatant misrepresentation of reality. This is Bayard's photograph from 1850, in which he took two photographs, one in which he could enhance the sky and the other the foreground, and then cut them out and rephotograph them. Very early use of photomontage. But the first commercial photomontages were produced during the mid-Victorian era, when the practice was given the name combination printing by Rylander. This is his very famous story of man, the life of man. And one of my favorite early uses of photomontage was this famous so-called photograph of Ulysses S. Grant in front of Union soldiers on the battlefield. However, this background was actually a Confederate encampment. This was Grant's face. This was another general whose name I don't remember at the moment, who was on a horse. And they took Grant's face and put him on the other gentleman on a horse in front of the Confederate encampment. So it's a complete lie. Spirit photography came into vogue right around the end of Civil War as a way for people to think that they could reach their loved ones who had been killed in the Civil War. For example, here's an elderly family with portraits in the background of deceased family members. Another use of photomontage. And here's one of Queen Victoria that incorporated photographs that had been cut from magazines. And anonymous aristocratic women made their own photo collages by getting hold of their friends' cabinet cards, cutting them out, and then recollaging them with their own artwork. Here's a mixed media artifact with a silver print from the late 19th century. And then we're now in the 20th century. The Dada movement encouraged a lot of photomontage. Women were very prominent in this field in the 20s and 30s in Germany in particular. This is by Greta Stern, by Dora Maar. And of course, Robert Capa, The Falling Soldier, which he claims was an actual document of a soldier's death. But this photograph has come under a cloud in which it's now speculated that he had staged this incident, and it wasn't in fact in the area in Spain where he said it was, but somewhere else. Of course, the Russians use photomontage for their propaganda. And Stalin took a lot of advantage of photomontage by having photographs re-photographed without his acolytes who had displeased him and had been sent off to the Gulag. This photo collage was by Lee Miller, was by Joseph Cornell, one of my very favorite early artists. And some contemporary photo collage artists, the Park Harrisons, Tom Chambers, Bin Zhang, me, another early one that I did. Why should a photograph always live on a flat surface? Hannah Hook took photographs, cut them up, interspersed them with magazines, with other objects, and recreated them as photomontage. And this particular cabinet card was used and inspired and used by artists during the Dada period. This piece is a three-dimensional encaustic piece that I made probably 12 years ago. And using old cabinet cards, again, quite a long time ago, I took the images from the cabinet cards and recombined them and then put them back onto the cabinet card and rephotographed them. Man Ray in 1923 took a photograph and added it to an object, as he did in 1955 with his matchbooks. And these are photographs that I've adhered to various different blocks. Each side of the block has a different image on it, and they're created with different materials. For me, the photomontage can create a strong narrative content to evoke dreams, emotions, longing, memory, and the non-linearity of time. Unusual juxtapositions are encountered serendipitously. Elements are integrated seamlessly. For me, it's an attempt to understand or maybe to escape from the dark and often incomprehensible chaos, randomness, and times we live in. I'm attempting to recreate reality, or at least to express the moldy meanderings of my own brain. These are some early photomontages that I made. In addition to being influenced by the great images that have surrounded me all these years and from my drawings from my childhood, my photo composite making is really intuitive. It's an in-process discovery. It's a dialogue with the elements within the image. And I found that the best ideas really come out of the process, just the doing of it. It's a detail. In addition to trying to perfect my craftsmanship, I learned to pay attention not only to the emotional content of narrative, but also composition, cohesion, symmetry, center focus, and single point perspective. From 2005, 2011, a long time ago, 2011. And color is important to me. Should the image be monochromatic or complementary or sometimes both? Because colors and their relationship to one another tell their own story. Uncanny and ancestry evolved from a series of cabinet card. And as I mentioned earlier, I would photograph the images on the original portraits that were on the original cabinet cards, and then I would rework them, paste them back onto the cabinet card, and create this wonderful series. It's a tremendous amount of fun. This is just part of that series. I will show you that some years ago, I saw these guys walking down the street in New York City and they were carrying balloons. I had my iPhone, snapped a picture, and thought, I've got to use these guys somewhere. So first I tried them on a photograph I had taken in Alabama. Not crazy about it. But then I had also taken this photograph of the interior of an abandoned warehouse in southern Alabama. And I ended up putting the balloons on the other side of the warehouse because I like the juxtaposition. I'm interested in narrative and storytelling. I like to think of each of my images as a visual narrative. I might have my own story in mind, but the viewer will have their own stories. I'm influenced by everything, such as 16th and 17th century portraits. And I created a series called Portraiture Redressed. I'm still interested in faces, and I love 17th century Dutch paintings. So this was created based on a painting by Vermeer called The Women in the Ermine Coat. And I started the project actually in 2011 with these earlier portraiture redressed images. I pay attention to the work of others. I continue to channel cinematographers, painters, and photographers. And in my downtime, I'm always looking at other people's work, including the work of many of you. I love Vermeer. How can you not love Vermeer? And Arnold Newman. This is Stravinsky, one of my favorite photographs ever. And Luis Gonzalez Palma, Jack Spencer, Edward Hopper, obviously, Sarah Moon, who I adore, and contemporary cinematographer and older cinematography too. Tanya Franco Klein, the late Erwin Olaf, love his work. The paintings of Andrew Wyeth and Wilhelm Hammershøi, an early 20th century Danish painter. And when I first saw his painting, my heart just leapt because of his use of interior spaces, which I'm committed to as well, mirrors, windows, doors, and the solitary figure, and his use of shadow and light as a geometric element. Somehow I felt like I've been incorporating his work all my life without even knowing about him. Gregory Crutzen, of course, because of his narratives and his solitary figures. And I study color palettes from movies. I pay a lot of attention to cinematography. So my recent work, which is narrative driven, as I mentioned, I'm obsessed with portals, windows, doors, mirrors, and the ambiguous relationship of solitary in that brief moment of time. I'm not sure it's obvious here, but this was made during COVID. This image, Blue Light, was based on The Automat by Edward Hopper. I use this image, this painting of his, as a template for my own work. So I photographed the interior of a store before it was, it was in the process of being renovated. And after shooting it, I cut out the windows, all the space between the blinds, the doors, and it needed a background. This was shot in Havana, Cuba, some years before, because I wanted my scene to be at night. So I placed the scene, the Havana scene, in the background. And notice the chair and table, those were cut out from the painting, which I had done a screen grab of, and just used it for placement. Playing around with the background. And I tried this child, this young man sitting at the table just for placement. Then I tried him in a different position, played with shadows and light, changed the lighting on the interior, which is complementary to the exterior light, added a headlight and the little Volkswagen in the background. Then I thought he looked better here, again, still playing around with light, but I didn't like the figure. So I went back to the drawing board, went back to this, put in a new table that I had shot elsewhere, added a chair, again, that I had shot somewhere else. And I thought I might use this woman, played around with the shadows, changing shadows, again, just experimenting. I had shot her in various different positions on my porch some years before. So I had her sitting here at one point with the new table, the chair, and I placed a cup of coffee in front of her. And then ended up with this image. This was, I believe, the final image. Well, let me go back. Yeah, that was the final image. And I also want to show you how I played with my idea of Hopper's Nighthawks. So I took this photograph in Provincetown a couple winters ago, a deserted nighttime scene. I thought maybe I can do something with this. So I cut out the store, I cut out the windows, played around a little bit with perspective, changed the diagonal of the building, and remembered that some years before that, in a trip to Texas, I had taken the interior shot of a hotel in Marathon, Texas. And these had been students of mine in North Dakota some years before that, and I had shot them. And when I shoot models, I never know where they're going to go or what I'm going to do with them, if anything. This was also shot in Provincetown, but I thought I could use this. Here was another model I had shot, tried using her. So I placed her into the interior of what is now a hotel lobby. And you can see the hotel sign from the Marathon, Texas interior spot. And the student from North Dakota, I tried here. So I'm creating a scene while I'm working with all the elements. And I really think of them as elements that have to work together. Played around with color, with light, but ended up changing the woman in the interior of the lobby and putting the boy here. And these are just, they're kind of drafts. You can see the motel sign in the background. But I also had photographed this guy from, he was in Los Angeles, I was in Massachusetts. It was during COVID. I was desperate to shoot models. So we shot him long distance. And if you're interested, I can explain how we did that. But it was how I was able to continue working with live models during COVID when we were all sheltering in place. So here he is, Sam is in one position, and the girl is now happily sitting in a chair in the lobby of the hotel. But then I tried another position of him. He was also shot at that same time, long distance. So I placed him here and it made more sense. There was more of a relationship. But to test my relationship, I created grid lines so that it would appear as if he was actually looking directly at her eyes. So this seemed to work. And this is without the grid lines, a little bit further along. Oh, sorry, that's not the final one, but it's very close to the final one. Forgot to put the final one in. So last year, I discovered AI generative art, which offers dozens of user-controllable settings, such as a text prompt, which is what the user wants to create, controls to manipulate color, composition, field of view, and background, among others. And I know many of you are interested in this. So these are some very recent hybrid images. They're made with photographs taken with various cameras, text-generated images made with Midjourney and manipulated with additional software, adding textures and filters. Back to the original question. If you start with your own photograph or add your photograph into one of its images and you transform it by adding all of these possible features, is it your photograph or is it a photograph at all? So last year I was working on a series of photographs based on the life of a soldier who had been in Paris after the war. And because I wasn't in Paris after the Second World War, but I wanted to create these scenes, I was able to create scenes using photographs I had, vintage photographs, found photographs, and AI to create some of the Parisian interiors. For example, the interior of this image was created using AI and my prompts, but I added a model. So it's a composite, as is this. So all the images that I will show you now are all composited, some with AI components and some with actual photographs that I've taken, recombined, and then manipulated heavily in Photoshop or other software. Again, many, many, many different images go into each one of these images, such as this and this and this. The view from the window is actually from a photograph I took in 1961 when I was traveling to France. And I'm still obsessed with windows, mirrors, doors, and I sometimes use AI to create the interior spaces for my stories. And I feel like I'm acting kind of like a props manager. And it really is a hodgepodge of media and processes. I started with this image, which I didn't like, but ended it this way. Again, hybrid collaboration between me and AI. This was created after multiple re-rolls and various parameters. Another hybrid image. I'm going to stop saying hybrid because they're all hybrid. The AI software I used to help create these images was Midjourney, but now I'm working with another program as well called Leonardo AI. So I'm getting more adventurous with AI, freeing me up to try different styles. I play and experiment, and I like to explore the human and non-human connections. So these were earlier photo collages that I took way, way, way long ago, or that I created a long time ago. But I thought about using AI to create similar kinds of scenes. This is a source image, and it's actually one of many images in my book in which he himself is a composite. There are two people here, plus compositing the components of his neck piece and his hat. So I use this as a source that I brought into AI. Oops, what's going on? And this was one of the images that was derived from that source image. This was another one. And so on. This too. And this one. And I love these. This was also manipulated later in Photoshop, but it was something I could never have created without the use of AI. This is a source image, a photograph I took a couple years ago. And the oranges were used and the costume was used to inspire this image. Another source image. Right. And I used his face twice, actually, in this image to composite. Here he is again. And this source image became this image. And bear in mind that it's not a direct, it's not a direct relationship. I have to go through many, many, many different iterations and re-rolls. This image I took and composited. I met her actually in MoMA a couple years ago and took that image, brought it into Midjourney just to see what would happen. And I was delighted. This as well. This was a source image I used. What could I get from this? This image was derived from that as well as other images. So a couple months ago, I created this little series called Science Fair, which was a lot of fun. And it tells the story of these Midwestern girls from Nebraska who were showing off their inventions at a science fair in their high school. And these are the girls. They all look very similar because they live in a little town and they're all related to each other. And these are their inventions. Again, these were all manipulated. They were composited. I used AI specifically to create the inventions, but after the images met my needs, I brought them into Photoshop and added a lot of additional elements. Sometimes the experiments don't go well. Another little series is called Bad Bunny, in which a naughty bunny gets into trouble. He jumps into the local swimming pool where he's not allowed. He gets into the supermarket, makes a mess. He disguises himself as Humphrey Bogart. And Silence is a series of images that I created, mostly with AI and some with photographs, to in response to the taking of hostages. I'm also, as you know, very interested in film noir and created many images. This was actually photographed in Cape Cod, but I created many images with the idea of a noir story. Again, these are all composites using AI. Oops, sorry. I didn't mean to do it again. Okay. Consider also, as many do, collaborating with AI rather than fighting against it. Find ways to leverage the technology in your workflow. adding your own creative contribution, you then focus your own attention on qualities of your experience and your efforts on the creative and expressive aspects of your art. Photography, as we all know, is not real at all. It's an illusion of reality with which we create our own private world.
Thank you, Fran.
I hope there's some questions.
I hope we have some questions too. Anybody out there with a question?
I have a question. When you're using AI, and like in some of your images, you have an interior, there's a bed against the wall, and there's a woman sitting, woman in a red dress sitting on the bed, or something similar to that. How do you, what kind of commands, or, I mean, what I'm trying to get is, can you start with an interior and then with AI place the bed against the wall, and then take the woman in the red dress and have AI place that woman in a specific place on the bed? How is that done?
That's not the way that I would do it. What
Okay,
I
well,
would,
tell me.
okay, what I would do would be to create the interior space, because I can describe pretty accurately what I want an interior space to look like. And then after many re-rolls and many attempts, I can often get a room like I like it. But most of the people are models that I've shot elsewhere that I then bring into the image, the AI image.
So you use AI to create the interior space.
In almost all cases, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you composite the lamps and the chairs and the people and that kind of thing.
Sometimes, but sometimes they're thrown in there by AI for no reason that I can understand, but I'm happy to use them. Other times I'll place them in, but it's a continuation of the kind of compositing I've always done. It's sort of a seamless way of me working because I've always done compositing.
Right. Very good. Thank you. That's very instructive.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, do you feel that narrative photography is on the ascension, both in acceptance and prominence over the last 20 or 30 years, as opposed to straight documentary photography?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never actually thought of that. I don't know. I would actually like to ask people here. I would think that yes, the answer would be yes, but I'm not sure. I've never really thought of it that way. But now that you mention it, I think since the 1970s, there's been more emphasis on narrative photography with people that I mentioned. In fact, now that you mention it, the early photographers who I really fell in love with, such as Dwayne Michaels, they were really telling stories, or meat yard. And they were not that work was not initially accepted, and it was looked down upon. Michaels had to do his publication work, his commercial work, in order to survive. So he was doing his narrative work on the side. So you're right. It wasn't really until the 80s or 90s that I think it became accepted as an art form. That's a good question.
And not that it's important, but it may be a factor. Do you think that the rise in smartphone photography diminished the necessity of documentary photography and opened up this whole creative area of narrative photography? Since everyone's taking photographs, when there's a major disaster, you don't need a professional. By the time the professional gets there, the event's over and they're just photographing the carnage.
I think that's a really interesting point, because anyone who happens to, I mean, look what happened at the George Floyd death.
Yes.
Wouldn't have happened if somebody hadn't been there with a cell phone. That's absolutely true. So I think it is changing quite a bit. That's a very good point. I mean, things are changing so quickly in our field now, it's kind of hard to keep up with it. But it's an interesting observation.
Daria has one in the chat. When you're using AI, how are you getting images that are high enough resolution to make nice prints?
They're not high. They're not high, but there's software that can upscale them. When you make an image and using AI, it's about 1024 pixels by 1024 pixels. So they're pretty tiny, and that's at 72 DPI. But I've been able to make really gorgeous prints up to 36 inches with them. And I know, and Paul Toledano, his work is gorgeous, and he's told me that he's made 9 feet images from his AI work. So now with software, upscaling software like Topaz, you can really upscale them as much as you want.
Okay.
Did I say Paul Toledano? I meant Phil Toledano.
Okay.
This
Yes,
is Ted Garner. I was curious, you mentioned that you're process driven and your best ideas, you said, come out of the doing of the process.
Right.
How formulated in your brain do you have your image before you start compared to where you finish?
I have zero idea in my head initially.
Okay, okay. fair.
And I'm always surprised, but I still end up coming up with kind of the same image over and over again over the last 15, 20 years. So it's not as if I think that I want to make such and such. I just start doing. I might
Okay.
find an image like a room or a mirror that I want to work with, and I start playing with that image and see where it goes. I kind of get into this zone, and it's very unconscious. But I'm not one of those people who can plan things. I just don't have that kind of mind. So
Interesting.
I have to depend on my unconscious.
I love it. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, I'm not sure whether it's Jerry or Gary. Sorry about that. But do you have a large model budget, or are you able to charm subjects into posing?
I charm them into posing.
I knew that.
I have zero budget for modeling.
I have one more question. The lighting, do you do in your photos? Do you use Photoshop or some lighting software to
No.
do that?
No, I don't even know of a lighting software. I do it all in Photoshop.
Okay, very good.
And I don't use lights. I don't have any lights at all.
Okay.
And when I photograph people, when I photograph models, I try to photograph in as bland a situation as possible if I know that I want to use them, so that I can create my own shadows and highlights down the road.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else out there?
They're a quiet group.
It is a quiet
I
group.
thought I'd get a lot more pushback
I
about
know, I did too.
Well,
We did
it's
the right group.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, is it in your mind still an open question about the photography versus, AI type work, or?
I think the jury's out about that.
Yeah.
I don't call my AI images photographs. I refer to them, actually on my website, I have a section called intelligent images.
Mhm.
So I refer to them separately, but what is about to happen is that there's going to be less and less division between the use of AI and photography. And people are now using elements and some of the functions in Photoshop that use AI, and they claim that they're just manipulating a photo, they're just doing a little bit of work in Photoshop, and in fact it's AI. So I think it's unclear what these are going to be called in the future. At some point, maybe they'll just be called two-dimensional pieces of art or visual narratives. I don't know. But the line is becoming very, very blurred right now between a photograph and an AI creation.
Is that a good thing or a bad
Quick
thing?
question.
Yeah,
Are you finding yourself using your smartphone increasingly, or are you still using regular straight cameras?
Yeah, I'm using my smartphone a lot because I'm very lazy, and I'm not the most proficient photographers, like I really struggle over f-stops and lighting and stuff like that. For example, I was in Berlin and Paris, and I took my Leica with me, and I never took it out of the bag. I just used my phone, and I took some interesting pictures. So,
Well, oh, and clearly there's a battle going on between smartphones and camera equipment, and the smartphones are winning because they're using technology to do it by data rather than the cameras that are still trying to perfect hardware. You know, that's the fight, and they're losing that fight.
you mean cameras are losing the fight?
Cameras are losing that fight.
Yeah, also I always have my phone with me. I take it with me everywhere.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and you can shoot in RAW. Although today I was told something that you guys might not be aware of, or maybe I'm just really slow and didn't realize it. But if you want to take a picture with better depth of field, you need to take it as a JPEG rather than RAW. And the reason is because when you take a RAW photograph, it turns it into an HDR, a high, and so it over sharpens things, even the background. And if you're not interested in that, like I'm not interested in that, then you can't override it. You have to shoot in JPEG. Have you ever heard that? Somebody told me that today.
No, never heard it.
Thank
I
you
mean, the
for sharing that.
disadvantage is then you have a smaller file than a RAW file, but on the other hand, you can always upscale it later if you want to.
Yeah, I'm beginning to believe that raw files are obsolete and unnecessary. They're now the provenance of process people who just love to get everything in the perfect order and have a wide dynamic range. I keep asking myself, what are you photographing that it needs so much work? Go out and photograph something that you don't need to have a raw photo to get everything out of it. So JPEGs are just wonderful, and they're just fine.
What do you real photographers think about that?
I think it
Well-
depends on what you're doing with it, you know, if you need the ability to manipulate more, especially with your lights or your shadows, you know, the RAWs are necessary, but if you don't need that, the JPEG's perfectly fine.
I can do plenty of manipulation with a JPEG,
Yeah.
really. And
It does sound sacrilegious. I'm gonna have to really sit on that statement.
I
about
know, me
JPEGs.
too. I almost didn't tell you about not using my Leica, but you'll be happy to know I did use it recently, so. It's still here, I still have it, I still use it.
Well, it's all about creating the art. The tools are just a way to get there, and how you use them is a very personal thing.
Exactly.
Fran, I've admired your work from a distance for a number of years. It's beautiful to hear you reflect on it. So thank you for your comments and for showing so much of your work today.
Thank you, that's very kind of you.
Fran, I have a question.
Hi.
Hi, it's Xuan here. I have a question.
Mhm.
I was wondering what kind of pushback against AI have you faced? I know that not calling them photographs, like some people have issues with calling AI generated work photographs, and you have addressed that. Are there any other pushbacks that you have faced?
A year ago, I was getting a lot more, and I was getting some nasty comments when I would show work, even if I would say that it was AI, I was still, you know, being accused of being a child murderer or something. But now there's a lot less of it. It seems to be accepted a lot more than it was even a year ago, because many people are using it and people are understanding it. And also, I'm very clear about not calling the image a photograph. And I think as long as people are honest about what it is they're creating and how they're creating it, until we come up with a better term, then I think it's perfectly safe.
Well, you just described the transition between film and digital.
Yes.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly. It's exactly the same. Yeah. Right. And you remember when you started using digital, I'm sure, what kind of pushback you got for that. Oh, that's not a real photograph. How could you do that? Yeah.
It was pushback against color when it came out against
That's right.
black and white.
That's right. I had a show recently in Mexico, and she was very nervous because my work was in color. And she said, I've never shown color before. She didn't know what to do with it. And now she shows color all the time, so.
Fran, we do have a question about the long distance model. Shoot.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. Okay, I was going to mention that. Okay, so during COVID, I couldn't shoot people. But I put a word out to various different people saying, would someone be interested in an experimental kind of photography in which they would model for me at their location and over either FaceTime or Zoom, we would be able to have them photographed. So for example, Sam, who you saw, he was in Los Angeles, I was in Massachusetts, and he had a friend with him who had a camera, and they set up, I talked to him ahead of time, they set up a little ersatz photo studio in which he was standing against a sheet, a green sheet or something. And over the phone, I could see what the guy with the camera was looking at. So I would direct him over the camera to tell Sam how to stand, what to do with his hands, how to look, and so forth. And the guy with the camera shot he shot the photographs, and then he uploaded them to me, and I was able to use them. So that was one example. Another one was my friend who was in Dallas at the time. We did the same thing, but she had a remote control. So I would talk to her long distance using FaceTime and explain to her what I wanted, where she should sit, look at the light where she was and so forth. And she was holding a remote control in her hand. So all the photographs I took of her, she has her hands like this, but that worked out pretty well. And then two other people, they each had, one had her mother and another one had a friend who snapped the photographs. And I did it with a series of people in Mexico as well. And that worked out really well. There was a guy with a photograph, with a camera, and I would look through, on the phone, I was looking through his lens. So I would see a little teeny weeny image of what he was seeing in his camera, and I would tell him, and it also had to be translated into Spanish. I would tell him how I wanted the models to be standing, what their gestures should be. And he took many, many photographs that way and then uploaded them, and I was able to use them. So as I say, necessity is the mother of invention, and I was desperate.
It worked.
Go ahead, Rita.
No, I just said it worked.
Oh, okay.
It did. Yeah, it did. It's not ideal, but during the whole period of COVID, it was a great way for me to keep working.
Judy has a question. She wants to know if you're able to enter your partial AI images into online exhibitions.
Some, but not all. For example, I just read today that Critical Mass will not accept any AI work, which is a shame because I have all my images ready to be submitted, but I can't enter that. But some of them don't care, and some of them specifically ask for AI. I think within a year or two, most of them will be a little bit more open, but I can't.
Yeah, a friend of mine who is a professional model during COVID, she redesigned her whole apartment, and each room had a theme to it. And then she would set up, there's software that you can connect her video with the photographer's camera, and she would let the photographer make the photographs of her posing in different rooms or whatever, and then he would send those to her, and she would do some Photoshop work on it and send them back, and charged a lot of money to do that. So,
oh my God, I wish I had known about that.
yeah,
And I wish I had known about the software.
Yeah.
And I wish I had charged. I didn't. I didn't. That's great.
See, your images have a lovely overall unifying patina. Is there anything you would share about achieving that?
Just play around. I do a lot of work using curves in Photoshop. I don't really use filters so much. I don't do that. But I do pay a lot of attention to color and textures. And I also am very careful about where I put my textures. I don't put them all over. And I think about the part of the image that I want to isolate, that I want the eye to be drawn to. A lot of it depends, though, on what the original photograph has to offer. So I like to start with an image that has what I call good bones, a good place to start. And then I just work from there. So I sort of take advantage of what's already there, and then I just build on it.
Steve has a nice observation about cameras. Cameras seem to become, for some, like packing a bathing suit on a business trip. You pack it, and not to take it out of the bag.
That's exactly what I did in Europe. I never took it out. That's true.
Okay, Barbara, where'd you go, Barbara? You jumped. There you go. How are the major institutions looking at this?
Some of them are very, very open to it. I did a presentation a couple months ago at a local college, and they love the AI work, and so they're going to give me a show. I don't know of other institutions that are so forward thinking as that one, but I think it's becoming much. First of all, everybody's curious about it, number one, and number two, I think it's becoming so much more common that institutions will, if they're not already, start really paying attention to the work that can be done. I mean, when you think about it, it's something, it's a tool that's not just available for photographers. And I know photographers justifiably are somewhat threatened by it. But I think what it does in some ways humanize the ability to make art and the ability to create. And I'm not talking about just typing a text and an image pops out, but typing a text, getting an idea, working with the idea, reworking with the idea. It can generate ideas that might not have appeared in your brain up until that point. And I think that's kind of a democratization of the field.
Janet would like to know, how do you achieve the soft glow on many of your images?
Well, you'll have to have me come down and give another class. It's not really something I can easily describe. But again, I create a lot of lighting textures using curves primarily. A lot of the adjustment layers in Photoshop. I mean, I've been working with Photoshop for close to 30 years, so I sort of know how to do this stuff. But it's also a lot of trial and error.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I can't answer specifically.
Yeah. Okay, does anybody else have anything? If not, we'll go ahead and wrap it up tonight.
Well, thank you all. Thank you very much for this
I
opportunity.
would like to make probably a very silly comment,
Okay,
but
go
our
for it.
grandparents were very upset when their horse and buggy was taken away and the car came on. and this is the way some people are approaching this. They are so terrified, so intimidated, and it's so wonderful to have something new.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
That's very sweet. That's very true.
Well, I want to say that this was just a really wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And you know, I'm Jim McInnes, and you know me on Facebook.
I know, and I love your work, Jim.
Oh, well, thanks. But it was really well presented, and your work I've admired for quite a while. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you all. Thanks very much. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Fran. We're going to take off for the summer. We'll be back in October with another artist talk.
All right.
Have a good summer, everybody.
You too.
You
Bye.
too, Michael. Thank you, Fran and Michael.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.